Welcome. It's another Boxscore Geeks show. Is Steve Nash better than Kobe Bryant? And can Anthony Davis keep it up? Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. You may not realize this, but we are actually live and we'll be going for that in the future. We had some technical difficulties, so you may not hear about it just yet, but rest assured, as soon as the live show has all the kinks worked out, we'll keep you in the loop. With that said, I'm Dre Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers, and this show is always produced by the voice of God, Brian Foster, aka Box Score Brian on Twitter. Say hey, Brian, just so people know the sound of your voice.
Oh, what's up, Trey? What's going on? Yeah, this is actually our second show of the night. We had the aborted first show, but we'll keep going. We have some good stuff to talk about, and yeah, I'm happy to see that you have some stuff to say about Kobe and Nash.
Yeah, actually, that's pretty much the show because I figured with the season in full swing, the thing people definitely want to hear about is a player that hasn't even suited up this season and is probably done. But I've got some interesting points about that. I had an article I wrote today. So we'll be talking Steve Nash. And additionally, before the show really got going on that, because just be forewarned if you're listening to the show, if you're watching the show, it's going to be really Nash heavy, but I'll try and keep it pertinent. But before that, I wanted to talk the hot start to the season, particularly one Anthony Davis. Something I didn't actually put in the script, Brian, I'm already off book, is the fact that if we look at what makes MVPs, this is an article I wrote a while ago. Pretty much you need to be on a winning team. The last player to make it to get MVP without winning at least 52 games was Michael Jordan, and that was back when he was winning Defensive Player of the Year and MVP simultaneously and outscoring second place by at least 5 points per game. Anthony Davis right now is a one-man wrecking ball. Currently on his own, Anthony Davis would be a playoff team. Just let that sink in. In the East, Anthony Davis on his own right now would make the playoffs. He is currently playing basically 25% better than the best seasons we've seen in the history of the NBA. I don't think he can keep that up. But that said, he's got some stats that put him in unique company. Brian, one of the things I sent you was a basketball reference link. And basically, if we look
Oh,
at
we're bringing
players,
it up right now. Yeah.
all right, if we look at players that have scored 20 points per game, and he's doing it efficiently. That was one of his problems in the past. He was more inefficient. He's starting to score efficiently, but 20 points per game, 10 rebounds, 4 blocks, and 2 steals a game. I don't know if he hit the 2 steals tonight, but he did hit the 20, 10, and 4 easily. The only other two players in the history of the NBA to do that are David Robinson and Hakeem Olajuwon. I feel obligated to point out that the NBA did not keep blocks and steals in their box score through all of their history. So certainly, I suspect Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in his earlier days did this. But in regards to modern players, this is really unique company for Anthony Davis to be in. He is absurd. Again, I don't expect him to keep it up at this rate, but even if he degrades by 33%, he's the easy MVP and will snatch that best power forward in the league right away from Kevin Love. So that's all I got now is holy cow on Anthony Davis. What I'll note is there are a few other players. So right now, when we look at the league, both Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade are playing like stars, and LeBron James and Kevin Love are not. And what it turns out also is the Miami Heat are defeating the Cleveland Cavaliers in regards to win-loss record. So yeah, and what I'll actually bring up, and this is a post I linked in the script, Brian, is Chris Kaman. So a few years back, Chris Kaman was signed by the Dallas Mavericks for $8 million a season. And I was very vocal as to why this was a bad move at the time, even making it to the front, or not front, the ESPN True Hoop blog, and with me arguing with Mark Cuban in the comments. And what Josh Weil, who's an amazing friend of the podcast, showed was, yeah, Chris Kaman had this really hot start, but regressed to earth. Another post I wrote that I linked as well, Brian, is George Karl is an idiot. And in that post, George Karl says Al Harrington is his MVP. which was sketch. But at the time, Al Harrington was playing the best of his career, which amounted to being an average player. And the same thing, he just had a really hot start. And this happens in the NBA. Now, I'm not going to say that Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade don't keep this up. In fact, we don't know if they will, or if LeBron James and Kevin Love are in fact done. Obviously, LeBron James just got that triple double that was rescinded to just being a double double a few nights ago. But basically, it's the start of the season. It's hard to know. Arturo's even written a post showing kind of the beginning of the season, the point margin is really crazy. Then it evens out as the season goes along. At the end, it gets crazy as teams are tanking or resting for health. So basically, what it all comes down to is the start of the season is nuts. We've seen this before, and this is what's known, I think, as the availability heuristic, which is because some of these players, particularly the Heat, are fresh in our minds because we've been talking about them all off season, we're going to notice and go, this seems absurd, and how can this happen? I think in the long run, it kind of averages out. But at the same token, I've basically been saying now for a few years, predictions are hard and who knows? And I'm going to stick with that. Anything you want to add, Brian, on hot starts and Anthony Davis, or can we go straight to the meat of the podcast?
Now, let's be really brief on this. Anthony Davis has been amazing. It's the 25% better is the crazy part, not how good he is. None of these the best player. I don't think we are too surprised to say before the season he'll be the best player right now, but that much better is pretty crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think he keeps it up. I mean, it's possible, and if he does, that's just absurd. What I actually want to see is him play at a really top level and get MVP on like a 40-win team. Because that just doesn't happen. And I mean, you can't deny it. Like right now, I'm going to go to boxscoregeeks.com. There is not a player that's even close to Anthony Davis as we speak. So just for some perspective, you can race me, Brian, to see if you get it up in front as well. Currently, Anthony Davis has a wins per 48 of .498. Like I said, that literally means he is on his own an average basketball team. And the next best players all have 1.7 wins. So he has 0.6 wins. I want to stress this is in 6 games. Those other the players that are in second place, that's Kyle Lowry, Gordon Hayward, and James Harden, they'll have 1 or 2 more games than him. This is just absolutely absurd. Can he keep it up? My answer is no, but just this is absurd play that we're seeing.
Well, the real question here is, will he complete this historic season, I think, right? Of course, he's not going to be the best season of all time. At least we don't.
We have no idea. Yeah.
He's pretty good.
He's damn good. And I'm excited to see what happens. I mean, I actually am in favor of him playing so well that they have to give him the MVP because, I'm going to look real quick. New Orleans is going to get the win tonight against Los Angeles because it's Los Angeles. That's like a bye week in football. But currently they have, before going into this game, they have a 3-3 record. They'll actually get a positive win-loss record. I don't expect that to keep up. So, we'll have to see. I mean, well, actually, I take that back. With how they're playing with Anthony Davis, yeah, they'll have a positive win-loss record. They would actually have to have one of the worst teams ever to not be able to keep this up if Anthony Davis keeps it up. So anyway, that's all I got there. And like I said, I wanted to talk Steve Nash, but actually it occurred to me, Brian, in show number 1, we talked this. In show number 2, I forgot because I was so excited to get going to talk about Steve Nash. Last week, we did a poll on Klay Thompson. Basically, Klay Thompson this season has been shooting more efficiently than before, and a large part of that is shot selection. So last week, we asked, which Klay Thompson is real? The new and improved Klay Thompson who's shooting efficiently, or the old Klay Thompson that's really amazing from 3, but just takes a lot of dumb shots? Which one are we going to see this year? And proving that we have no idea, the fans, at least unless someone voted differently, Brian, were split 62-62, not knowing which Klay was the real Klay.
We're still there, dead even.
Of course, since that happened, Klay Thompson's been injured, so we'll just have to wait and see when he comes back. But again, beginning of the season, who knows what's going to happen. All right. So with that said, I'm going to go on to Steve Nash. And the reason I wanted to talk Steve Nash is actually pretty obvious. A Lakers fan saw a picture or took a picture of Steve Nash golfing and basically tweeted out. And Steve Nash, because of this, felt obligated to write a Facebook post that explained, guess what? Playing professional basketball for 30 to 40 minutes a night is not the same as golfing. And actually, this was really depressing. I'm going to read part of it. So he said, I have a ton of miles on my back, 3 bulging discs, a tear in one, stenosis of the nerve route, and I'm going to get this wrong, spondylolisthesis. Apologies for just mucking that up horrendously. I suffer from sciatica, and after games, I often can't sit in the car on the drive home, which has made for some interesting car rides. Most nights, I'm bothered by severe cramping in both calves while I sleep, a result of the same damn nerve roots, and the list goes on. This is the saddest part to me. He says, somewhat comically. Sorry, Steve Nash, that's not funny at all. And he says, this is sad as well, what you deserve, this is an odd way of phrasing it, for playing over 1,300 NBA games. By no means do I tell you this for sympathy. You have my sympathy, Steve Nash, especially since I see these ailments as badges of honor, but maybe I can bring you some clarity. So, I mean, obviously, this is just really depressing looking at Steve Nash, one of the greatest of all time. And the thing that was interesting to me is one of the stories in Steve Nash's career is that when his contract ended with the Mavericks, I think his second contract, he was offered a better deal from Phoenix. And he went to Mark Cuban and basically said, I like you guys. I want to stay with you. But the Suns are offering me, I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 10 million a year for, I think, 4 or 5 years. And Mark Cuban's like, we can't match that. And what is depressing in hindsight to me is I don't think they thought Steve Nash could last. I mean, I seem to recall that was an issue, injuries at the time. And even more to the point, they were almost saying you shouldn't be playing basketball. Like, you're asking for 50 million over 4 or 5 years. Are you crazy? You're not going to keep this up. And that's actually really depressing. It's a depressing thing in sports to me in general, and that I don't think people get is just your body's not the same playing top level sports for years. I'm a computer programmer. I might get carpal tunnel. And with that, I just have to wear some wrist braces and I'm fine. But professional sports athletes, Steve Nash, to me, that was one of the most depressing parts, is to say he has been one of the most impressive players. The quote I always say about him is, at no point in his career, except now actually, could you have predicted the next phase of his career. Now, at the end, when he's just old and beaten up, it's the only time we can say he's old and beaten up, he's going to retire. But before that, you basically, as a rookie, you had no idea what was going to happen. He didn't look like a good rookie. Didn't look like he was going to turn into a star. He turned into a star. He turned 30. When players turn 30, they're supposed to start degrading. He turned 30. He got even better. So what can you say about that? But that actually prompted me to write a post comparing him to Kobe Bryant, because they entered the league at the same time. And Kobe Bryant is easily considered one of the greatest of all time players, particularly because of his scoring, whereas Steve Nash is not. So I've got some fun charts. I'll let you mess around with them, Brian. But I ended up writing an article about why Steve Nash is better than Kobe, kind of. And my bigger point, and I actually want to talk a little bit more about this, is how Steve Nash and Kobe Bryant illustrate why it's hard for people to notice good players versus great players. So, for instance, one of the things Wins Produce does, a lot of stats don't do this. I don't know if RPM at ESPN does. Again, it's a black box metric. Unless you're the creator of it and can tell me exactly what it does, don't waste my time in the comments and say you understand how it works. But in other sports, like wins above replacement, you compare first baseman to first baseman, shortstops to shortstops. Wins Produce does that. We compare shooting guards to shooting guards, point guards to point guards. So comparing Steve Nash to an average point guard, if we were to watch a game of Steve Nash playing and were to watch a game of, I'll call a player Joe Average play, we really wouldn't be able to distinguish a lot of stats from each other. They'd shoot roughly the same number of shots. They would make a close number because, the difference in Steve Nash being an amazing shooter is in percentages. And actually, this was a story that was told in Wages of Wins, again, related to baseball, but he goes, this is Wages of Wins. But let's look at batting average. We see that Ty Cobb's lifetime mark was 0.366. When Gwynn, let's see, this is Tony Gwynn, retired, his career mark His career mark was 0.338. So Cobb safely hit 37% of the time, while Gwynn hit safely on 34% of his at bats. If all you did was watch these players, could you say who was a better hitter? Can one really tell the difference between 37% and 34% just staring at the player's play? To see the problem with the non numbers approach to player evaluation, consider that out of every 100 at bats, and for baseball, people who don't know baseball, a player would expect to get roughly 4 or 5 at bats per game. Cobb got just 3 more hits than Gwynn. That's it. 3 hits. If you saw every at bat for both players, could you see the difference? And then, of course, they go on to say, of course not. And I was actually surprised to find the same is kind of true in basketball. When we compare Steve Nash to Kobe Bryant, that's the third tab, by the way, on that chart I sent you, Brian. Basically, one of the things that I discovered that made Steve Nash so much more effective than Kobe is that per game, Steve Nash got zero point 0.4 3-pointers more than Kobe Bryant. So basically, compared to an average point guard versus Kobe Bryant compared to an average shooting guard, Steve Nash made almost half of a 3-pointer more per game than would be expected. And that's huge. That's a huge part of why Steve Nash was so efficient. That's a huge part of why, basically Steve Nash's points are worth almost as much as Kobe, which if you look in the articles, I say. And that's impossible to notice, right? If you watched every possession of every game, Brian, you couldn't notice half of a made 3-pointer. And the average NBA game is about 200 possessions. And so I don't even buy, you were mentioning this to me before the show, I don't even buy that you're able to watch the game that in depth. And in fact, my graduate research was in computer vision. And that's one of the things we did was examine the human vision system. And basically, that's what we discovered. Your memory is not that good. At most, you can track about 7 things at a time. Certain things are going to stand out to your memory more than others. So the reality of this is that watching the game, you can't even really tell the difference between Kobe and Steve Nash. And even looking at, say, a single box score, you can't really tell because it takes games and games and games to know that it's the difference. And that's pretty much what the article said. And that's one of the reasons I like Steve Nash is that Steve Nash is one of the best players of all time because of these small differences. The article I wrote, and this was for Jeremy Britton, is why did Steve Nash defy the odds? And Steve Nash basically finely tuned his game. His efficiency went up. His turnovers went down. His assists went up. But it was by this very minute amount. It was by fractions of these per game, not by huge margins. And when we look at points, one of the reasons points stand out to people is that they're counted in 2. It makes it much easier to see the difference between scoring 5 points a game and 10 points a game. You're counting in 2s, but the other stats you're not. As an example, if Russell Westbrook were to get half a turnover less per game and 0.2 assists more per game, he would actually go up to close to that star level I keep saying he'll never hit. You would not be able to visibly detect this. And so again, I thought that was a really fun story with Steve Nash. The other points I'll make is basically when you factor in misses, Steve Nash has basically scored as many points as Kobe. He's one of the greatest assist players of all time. And it's basically that. When you look at Steve Nash, it's these very small set of things that he does really, really well. And then he does just okay enough on everything else to make him great. The last note I'll make is defense. I still don't buy that individual defense is as large as people are saying. I do buy there's a difference in magnitude. But just to stress, Kobe Bryant would basically have to be all of the 2008 Boston Celtics defense every year on his own to match Steve Nash. And I don't buy that's the case. That's actually really all I have on Steve Nash, Brian. As I mentioned, I've kind of started fading because we've been doing, we've actually been at this much longer than you'd have thought. But that's my points on Steve Nash. I'm really curious if you had anything to add to that.
No, I have not too much to add. I think a couple points maybe. First
go
off,
for it. Take as many as you want.
Yeah, no, the when you first proposed this topic to me and sent the links with him getting criticized by the fans, this is one of those things that always pisses me off. Kind of the old school. I guess the word I used in the email was Calvinist mindset that the NBA has, where even when players are on their own personal time, they just have to be. They can never have fun. They can never smile or laugh. They just have to care just so much about the game every second of their whole life. announcers will get pissed off if a player is on the bench smiling or laughing, stuff like that. I just hate that stuff. I love the 1980s Ickey Woods end zone celebrations. I love the fun side of sports. So whenever I hear this stuff about he should act this way, I hate that stuff. That's
Oh,
all I
by
have
the
to say
way,
about it.
so another tangent that I'll have to bring up is like Derrick Rose is getting in trouble with this too because he's been asked about his health and playing his hardest. And I think it was Alex Kennedy. I'll have to see if I can track down the tweet, but they mentioned that like the reason athletes just talk in cliches is because if they speak honestly, like they get eviscerated by the media because the media doesn't want to hear them say, yeah, guess what? I'm injured and I can't play 100% all the time. Or, yeah, you know what? I'm not interested in playing the game at full speed every second. If I did that, I would be burned out after a
Yeah,
season.
so they're forced to say, even though I have a broken leg, I'll play at 100% and be fine. And we expect them to say that. And pro athletes do have a warrior mentality, for better or worse, right? One of the things about the concussions that always are coming up are stories from the older players where, they'll meet up for some anniversary or whatever, team anniversary, and they all join up. And first off, a lot of those guys are dead. They don't live that long. But then on top of that, they're all limping around with walkers, even in their 50s and a young age, and they're totally broken down. And despite that, they all say they would do it over again and it was all worth it. So that's the warrior mentality, and Steve Nash showed that in his Facebook article. And again, I don't
It's
have an
it's tr-
answer.
it's tragic to watch that, right? Because you've got this guy saying, "Don't feel pity for me," and it's like I think there's also to your warrior mentality point, this kind of macho mentality of as an athlete, you're not supposed to act humble or ask for help. And that to me is depressing because the reality is I hope Steve Nash has saved his money well and is ready for the rest of his life where he's going to have to deal with injuries. But it's like there is this kind of you're not supposed to ask for help or admit that you have pain or all of this as an athlete, and that's kind of tragic to me.
Yeah, no, that's it. So we'll see. Maybe things will change, but I don't know. That's who we are as Americans, right? You got to be tough. You got to be strong. Never back down, Dre. That's what I say. That's my advice to you.
All right. That's the somber note to end on. Well, I guess that's what we will end on. Okay. So, anyway, as I mentioned, I'm sort of fading on this show because we've been doing it for a while. But on that note, like I mentioned, we are looking to go to a live show. We've plugged this a few times. We're starting to prototype it. In a week or two, we might actually announce ahead of time we go live because this took us a while to get up. I'm also probably going to move us to a new home. Currently, we're on the Boxscore Geeks channel, and we're called the Boxscore Geeks Show. I'm still looking to work with the Boxscore Geeks Show, but we're also looking to do kind of our own TV brand. So we'll probably actually be moving. We'll keep you appraised of the RSS feed, the YouTube channel, all of that when it's all set up. But just keep your ears perked for that. I'll have to think of a poll for this week's show, but that's all I really have there. And with that, I'm ready to go to shoutouts, Brian. I think you said you had some. I'm a little boring this week, even though I had some fun discussions on Twitter. My two shoutouts are actually both going to be NBA players. So my first shout out is Steve Nash. I couldn't have written this large article and talked about how great he is and felt bad for him without saying, of course, he's the shout out. The other one, I finally got around to watching ESPN's 3430 on the Bad Boy Pistons. And I got to give a shout out to Bill Lambier, who is just an amazing, first off, he's just great on that movie, the documentary. But also, and I think I included the link for you, Brian, for the phantom foul call in Game 6 of the 1988 finals, where, this is kind of crazy, but really the Pistons should have won a finals. And I feel kind of bad because that's where Adrian Dantley, who spent his entire career being traded the season before his team would go on to win a finals. They really should have won. There was a game where Isaiah Thomas was playing on one leg and they were up by one, and Bill Lambier defended Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on the last play of the game, and Kareem got called for a foul and got 2 free throws, and that's what won him the game. So it wasn't a foul. It wasn't a foul. I agree with that. Even if you say Bill Lambier was a dirty player, fine, whatever. Still wasn't a foul. Feel bad for you, Pistons. Should have been the first three-peat in a while. So those are my shout-outs. You got any, Brian?
No, I don't have any this week. Yeah, that's it.
Ah, you said you had one, but you forgot. I guess
I
you
did. I
couldn't,
didn't remember it. Sorry.
couldn't jog your memory. To whoever we were going to shout out, we apologize. We'll think of you next time. So that's that, and we will definitely see you next week. And I can't think of any topics that are on the horizon, but we will definitely think of something.